Good afternoon. My name is Tiffany Hansen. I am the Outreach and Engagement Manager with Luna Language Services. We are the largest language service provider here in the state of Indiana. We provide translation as well as interpretation services in over 200 languages, including American Sign Language services. Because of the nature of the work that we do, we are one of the most diverse employers here in the state of Indiana. And we thought it was a natural partnership to work with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to talk about national origin discrimination in the workplace and to share some of our best practices about creating an inclusive workplace for employees that come from all over the globe. So today, Brian Shoemaker with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's Indianapolis District Office will be talking about the legalities behind national origin discrimination and some compliance issues. And then Stevie Cromer with Luna Language Services will share some of those best practices about how she works to create that inclusive culture here at Luna. With that, I will hand it over to Brian Shoemaker.
And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the EEOC in general. I know most people know about the EEOC, so I'm just going to quickly go over that. I'm going to identify some ways discrimination can occur in the workplace. If we can identify what discrimination is, then we can see it. We can then take care of it. We can eliminate it in our workforce. We're going to understand the definition of national origin discrimination, so that we have a working knowledge of who's protected under national origin discrimination. And then we're going to learn some basic compliance issues that are kind of unique to national origin discrimination. And then finally, if we get a little bit of time, we'll talk about harassment prevention with specifics to national origin discrimination. So quickly, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We're a federal agency. And what do we do? Well, we deal with discrimination in the workplace. All right, we have field offices all over the country. In particular, the Indianapolis district is all of Indiana, all of Michigan, all of Kentucky, and then the western half of Ohio. And that's the field office that I'm in. And certainly, if you have any issues and you're in that district, you can contact me. So here are some of the laws that are enforced by the EEOC, and you can see them up there. There's a lot of them. Some of them you may recognize right away. Some of them you might be able to tell what they do just by reading the titles, and some of them you may not know what's going on just by looking at the title. Notice that nothing up there says national origin discrimination. Okay, so sometimes it can be hard to fully understand what exactly the EEOC does with workplace discrimination just by looking at the laws that we enforce. So I think it's easier sometimes to think about the EEOC and what we do if you distill those laws down into their basic form of workplace discrimination. What they're really dealing with are protected bases. So it is unlawful in employment to discriminate against someone based on a protected basis. And what are those protected bases? Well, it's race, color, disability, genetic information, religion, national origin, which we'll be talking about today, sex, which includes pregnancy, and age, 40 and older. And so if you're in one of those protected bases, you're covered by one of the laws that the EEOC enforces if you're being discriminated against or if an adverse action is being taken against you in your employment. So let's talk a little bit about national origin discrimination and Title VII. And you say, okay, well, we understand that national origin discrimination is a protected basis under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But what does that cover? What kind of employment practices does that actually cover? And I'm here to tell you, it covers almost every aspect of employment. Okay, it's certainly going to cover current employees, right? So any kind of pay issues or discipline or firing or promotion, benefits, terms and conditions, anything like that for current employees absolutely are going to be covered by under our statutes. But it could also include the hiring process. Okay, it can even include the recruitment process as well. So really, any type of employment process or when you're in the employment process, you're going to be covered by any of our statutes. Harassment is also covered. Okay, harassment is covered under our anti-discrimination laws. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about harassment later on. Retaliation, which we're not going to cover exactly, but retaliation is covered under Title VII and our other statutes as well. And retaliation deals with adverse action that is taken against somebody, an employee, um, if they participated in the EEO process. All right, that would be retaliation. And then finally, you'd also be covered if have an association with, somebody and you're being denied employment opportunities. And we'll talk a little bit about how that relates to the definition of national origin discrimination as well. So I really want to get us first with kind of a basis so that when we talk about employment discrimination, we can look for it and look for it in the ways that the EEOC looks at discrimination and the way that the law looks at discrimination. Because when we have these foundations and we know what the definitions are and we know what discrimination and the types of theories of discrimination there are, then we can really build upon that with best practices. And that's what Stevie's going to talk about when I'm done talking about the kind of legal aspect and compliance aspect. So the first way that we would look at discrimination, or that we could look at discrimination, is a way I think most people recognize discrimination in the first place, and that's disparate treatment. All right. It's when it's intentional discrimination. It's when an employer intentionally discriminates somebody in a protected aid or a protected group. So in this case, national origin. So if an employer is making decisions about someone because of their national origin, that's going to be a disparate treatment issue. Okay. Intentional discrimination. There's also something that can happen when we look at policies. So a company could have a policy or a practice that on the face of it looks completely neutral, but in reality is going to affect people of a national origin in a greater way. And we call that adverse impact. And so we have a factually neutral, or on the face of it, a neutral policy, but that in reality will affect people of a national origin. So if a company has something like that, then they want to make sure that their policy is job related and consistent with business necessity, and there isn't another less discriminatory method to achieve those same results that they have in that particular policy. All right, and that's adverse impact. The last thing that we're going to talk about as far as a type of discrimination or a theory of discrimination is harassment. And when I talk about harassment today, we're going to deal with the definition like this. We're going to deal with harassment as any unwelcome verbal or physical conduct that the person did not invite and they regarded that conduct as undesirable. That's going to be our definition now when we talk about harassment with national origin. It gives us a good idea of what to look for, and so that we can recognize these types of things in the company if we need to. So I want to talk now about who's protected. All right, we know Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 includes national origin, but who exactly is protected under national origin discrimination? It's going to be 4 different parts of the definition that we're going to review. The first is discrimination because of someone or because of their ancestors' place of origin. Okay, so that person doesn't necessarily have to have been born there. They didn't have to grow up there at any point. But if they had ancestry in that place of origin or that location, then they would be covered under national origin discrimination. And this even applies to if the employer didn't get it correct, right? If the employer perceives someone of a national or that's a national origin, even if they're not that national origin, if they perceive that person to be of a certain national origin and then take an adverse action against that individual, okay, that individual would still be covered under national origin discrimination. So it's about origin, it's about location. So we have location origin. What's another definition, or who else is covered under the national origin discrimination? Well, it could be ethnicity. Okay, it could be based on if an employer takes an adverse action against someone based on physical appearance. It could be based on language ability, if they have an accent, or how fluent they are in English, or any other type of linguistic characteristic. If they're taking an adverse action because of those characteristics or that ethnicity, that's going to be an issue, or that person's going to be also covered under national origin discrimination as well. The third type of person that would be covered under national origin discrimination is really, I know there's a lot on this screen, but really it's all about association. So if you're associated with somebody in a national origin group and that company is taking an adverse action against you because of your association, then you would be covered under national origin discrimination. This could apply to someone who is not of that particular national origin, but is associated with. So someone who may be married to somebody of a national origin, maybe someone who goes to the same place of worship, or maybe a school that's associated with a particular national origin group. Um, so if you, or even a social group that's associated with a national origin group. If the company takes an adverse action because of your association with that national origin group, you'd be covered under national origin discrimination as well. And finally, if a company has a citizenship requirement, okay, and they have that requirement because they are attempting to discriminate against a certain national origin group, then those people who would be discriminated against would also be covered under national origin discrimination. So if this is just a pretext, if this citizenship requirement is just pretext, if it's part of a wider scheme to try to eliminate certain national origin groups from coming into employment, then that would be covered under national origin discrimination, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as amended. All right, so we have our definition. We know what to look for when we think about the theories of discrimination, disparate treatment, adverse impact, harassment. We have some definitions. We know who's covered now under national origin discrimination. I want to talk about some compliance issues that are kind of unique to national origin discrimination. One is accent, okay? Just if a company is going to take any kind of action based on accent, they really need to be careful because accent and national origin is really kind of intertwined. And so if a company is making employment decisions based on accent, they really need to be careful that they don't violate Title VII. The way they can do that is by really making sure that when they analyze this, they have to ask themselves, does this accent, does it materially interfere with the ability to perform the job duties? How important is oral communication for this particular position? Okay, and does that accent actually, does it factually interfere with that commission? It's not just somebody's opinion that it may interfere with that communication. Okay, so you want to look at this from a perspective of, is oral communication important for this person's job? And does that accent interfere with that from a factual point of view? And when you're thinking about this, if companies are thinking about this type of thing, also make sure, would you make that same decision if someone had a really thick American regional accent? All right. So, would you be making the same employment decision for someone with a national origin accent that you would for someone with a really thick American regional accent as well? It's something to think about when we're thinking about discrimination based on accent. Another way to look at it is, when you're looking at accents, it doesn't take long to then go into how proficient in English a person is. And it's going to be the same type of analysis. If you're going to use English proficiency as a basis for an employment decision, all right, you want to make sure that you're able to justify that requirement. Okay, is that position, do they need to be fluent in English? Okay, what's the level of fluency that is actually required? How is it materially related to that job performance of that individual? All right, you're thinking about this in the same way that you would with an accent. And so if you're going to have, English fluency, policies, it doesn't take long to then go further down that road and then think about English only rules and other types of restrictive language policies. So this is a compliance issue. Okay, these are compliance issues that I'm talking about. So if you have a rule that says you must speak English at all times, okay, as soon as you get to work, it's English only until you leave work. All right, generally that is going to be, from EEOC guidance, that is going to be a violation of Title VII. So if you have that particular rule, you need to really look at that because EEOC guidance says that is going to be a violation of Title VII. Well, what about if you had that rule and it only applied at certain times? Okay, well, now we're talking about a policy issue. And when we think about policy issues, when we think about discrimination, we go back to adverse impact. And so we think about this rule, this policy, okay? Is it job related and is it consistent with business necessity? Okay, what kind of detailed, fact specific, credible evidence would you have that would be able to demonstrate the business purpose of requiring employees to speak a common language? Okay, that's what you have to think about. All right. Is it, is it something that needs to be happen only in this one particular area, or is it something that needs to happen at various times? What demonstrates? What's the evidence that shows that common language is necessary at this particular time or in this particular area? And so if you're going to have those, restrictive language policies or a policy that is English only for certain times or areas, you need to make sure that you tell your employees. Because if you don't tell your employees and then you discipline an employee for not speaking English at the time when you've never told them what time to do that, that could really be evidence of discrimination that occurred. Okay. When the rules applied, but no notice is given, that could be evidence of discrimination. And the last thing I want to talk about as far as these these issues dealing with compliance is appearance, discrimination based on appearance. So a lot of times we see these rules that are like a company wants an all-American look. So you want to really be careful with dress code policies that prevent a certain national origin from dressing in maybe their traditional ethnic way, but no one else has any kind of restrictions. So you just want to make sure that dress code policies, if you have dress code policies, are they are they adversely impacting a certain national origin? So I always talk about community partnerships. And I think it's a great opportunity to have community partnerships when dealing with these types of issues, because if businesses and corporations, if they partner with local groups in their community that deal with national origin, it really sets you up great for education, issues. It sets you up if you have problems at work, you have resources there, people that are there that could help, work out problems or resolve conflicts. So it's really a nice opportunity to meet other people in your community and then form partnerships and relationships with them. It's a nice idea to try to prevent discrimination and try to break down barriers as well. And so I'm going to leave you with this, this story about harassment prevention. Harassment, again, we're talking about harassment as unwelcome physical or verbal conduct that the person did not invite. They didn't invite that conduct, and they regarded that conduct as unwelcome. All right. And communication, I have a lot of things listed there, community, respect, restraint, but communication really is the key to harassment prevention. And I'll tell you a story. So I'm originally from Philadelphia. My wife is from Indiana. So on the holidays, we kind of go back and forth. And a couple of years ago, we went back to Philadelphia to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. We were staying with my parents, and it was the day after Thanksgiving. We were sat down for a meal, and the table was still long, set for everybody. And my mom was on one end, my dad was on the other, and my wife and I were in the middle. And we were eating dinner, and at one point in the dinner, my mom says, would anyone like any potatoes? And I look down and I see the potatoes are right in front of me. And I say to myself, you know what? I'm not interested in any potatoes. I'm not really hungry for them. So I say nothing. Okay. A few minutes later, my mom from one end of the table says, she again says, would anyone like any potatoes? And I look down and I say, well, I wasn't hungry for the potatoes the first time. I'm not hungry for them this time. So I don't want any potatoes. And I again say nothing. Okay. A few minutes go past. My mom gets up. She walks over to me. She grabs the potatoes and she says, I was asking for the potatoes. And she goes and sits back down. And I said to myself, I don't remember anyone asking for any potatoes. This didn't happen in my world, right? It was a lack of communication. We were not communicating. Okay. And before you think I'm blaming this on my mother, I'm not. Communication is a two-way street, and I was saying nothing. I was ignoring somebody trying to communicate. Okay. And you might say, well, Brian, why are we talking about this, great story, but why are we talking about this at an EEOC, webinar? Well, what would have happened if my mom asked for potatoes, or she said, would anyone like any potatoes twice? I say no, nothing both times. My dad then from the other end of the table says, oh, hey, Brian, could you please pass the potatoes? And I say, sure, Dad, here they are. What's my mom thinking now? Well, she could be thinking, oh, you know what? I always knew Brian liked Dad better than me, right? Favoritism. Or maybe she's thinking this, oh, I see. When a man asks Brian to do something, he'll do it. But if a woman says something, he won't. And now suddenly we have an EEO matter. Okay. And it doesn't take long for us to say, switch out potatoes with wage, switch out potatoes with, promotion increase. And to have someone say, you know what? I was asking for a wage increase for 4 months. The first time Brian asks for a wage increase, he gets it. Why is that? Is my race, my national origin, my sex, my religion? Why is that? What is the difference in treatment? Okay. And is it based on a protected activity? And so we have an act of miscommunication, rude behavior, me not communicating can lead to a great big issue and problem. And the reason why this is so important is communication. Okay. People communicate in different ways, genders communicate in different ways. Cultures communicate in different ways. And if we don't understand that there are people trying to communicate to us, if we're ignoring them, we're acting rude by not acknowledging, communication occurring, we can cause much, much bigger problems if we're not aware of our community and our ways that people communicate within our workplace. Okay. So communication really is key to preventing harassment from occurring, to preventing discrimination from occurring, if we can understand that people communicate in different ways, and we need to be able to be aware of that. So I am going to stop because I really only had a few other things I wanted to talk about, which is just kind of, if you're going to implement harassment-free policies, make sure you write them down, make sure you develop them with your vision in mind, and communicate it. Communicate it to your employees. Why is it important to have these types of anti-harassment policies? All right, and this is me. So Tiffany, I think you had some. Are there any questions?
There are a few questions, Brian. So um, we're going to address one or two questions now, and then we'll save a few more for the end. That way we make sure that Stevie has plenty of time to share as
Great.
well. So the first question I have is from Robert. He says, I'm curious what the EEOC is doing about discrimination that specifically excludes American workers with employment advertising that specifies workers with foreign labor work visas like H-1B visas or OPT work permits.
So one of the things that you might be thinking about, I'm not exactly sure what the intent of the question is, but the EEOC number one doesn't look at citizenship status. Okay, and there are some ways that employers use different visas to hire people that are needed in their workforce. If there are questions, I would say this: if there are questions about citizenship status, and I think this is what this person's getting at, the agency that you'd want to talk to is Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, and it is, I'm going to quick look at it. It is the Immigrant and Employee Rights section, and they deal with citizenship status and probably more closely deal with the visa situations. So that would be an excellent question to pose to Department of Justice, Civil Rights, Immigrant and Employee Rights section. But for the EEOC, we are not looking at someone's citizenship status when they come to file a complaint.
And he had added another question in here that I think kind of goes along with this. In the case of discriminatory advertising, who is breaking the law, employer or publisher of advertising medium? I know this started to come up this year as people were doing targeted Facebook ads to specific cultural communities to try to recruit. And they were talking about whether or not that looks like discrimination.
Well, that's a great question. What we would be looking at, the employer-employee relationship. And remember, the recruiting process is also part of that. So, it would depend on, there are some companies that will hire out an advertising firm or a recruitment service. And so then now we're looking, is there going to be a connection between them? Or is it just simply that the company gives it to a publication and they publish it? Okay, so those are two different ways. You want to see what has the company done to either did they hire out a recruitment service or did they just go ahead and give it to a publisher and the publisher published that information as is.
And I'm going to ask one more question because this will actually segue us into inclusive practices.
Great.
Libby has asked, with regard to language, what is the best way to approach an employee with an accent that makes it so that others are having difficulty understanding them? So how do you address that with an employee without engaging in discriminatory practices?
Well, from an EEOC, now I'm very interested in Stevie's response to this, because I think she's going to have, I think a lot of the stuff that she's going to talk about is going to address these types of issues. But if you're going to be addressing somebody because of an accent issue, it's probably you should be doing it because of a performance issue, meaning that there is a real documented performance issue that this person is having. This accent is actually interfering with this person's performance, their job duties. And so then you talk to them about like the way you would talk about a job performance issue with any one of your other employees. Okay, you're talking to this individual because there's an issue with their job performance and not because you don't like the accent. Okay.
Thank you. So we do have several other questions here in the Q&A, but I want to make sure that we give Stevie plenty of time. So we're going to save some questions for the end of the event. So if people want to hold on after 12:45, hopefully we can get to some more of those. But for now, I would love to toss it over to Stevie Cromer, the Cultural Enrichment Manager for Luna.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Hello, everyone. As Tiffany said, my name is Stevie Cromer. I'm the Cultural Enrichment Manager, Partner Liaison with Luna Language Services, and my pronouns are she, hers. And this is Luna. This is our staff. We are an interpreting and translation agency providing services in over 200 languages all around the world. We're an incredibly diverse staff representing 16 different cultures and speaking 16 different languages fluently on staff. And then we have a rather robust contractor pool all over the world as well that helps provide services in those other languages. I joined Luna in 2015 in a marketing role. And at that point, we were a full-time staff of only 11 people. And we all honestly sat in one big room pretty much all together and were very connected and had deep relationships. And we now today are a full-time staff of 46. So as you can see, we've grown quite a bit pretty quickly over the last couple of years. And because so much of our staff are members themselves of the immigrant and refugee communities, Luna has always been kind of a second home or a second family for many of our staff members. And we didn't want to lose that as we grew. We wanted to be really intentional about creating a culture that was still inclusive and warm and created this sense of belonging for everybody. So my role kind of transitioned about 3 years ago to be really intentional about that culture and intentional about creating that environment for our full-time staff that is so incredibly diverse, as you can see. So we started to think about how do we do that? And the first thing that we thought about was, who are we as people, right? So all of us are made up of all of these different things. It's our culture, our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, religion, even our cuisine and our music, our skills. All of these different things make up who we are as individuals and are really important parts of our personality. And we wanted people to feel like they could bring their whole self to work. I know it's kind of a cliche term and something that's been thrown around a lot, but I think it's really valuable and really important to think about it in that way, to think about that people need to come to work being able to demonstrate and show every part of them to be the most effective employees and staff members they can be. So using myself as an example, I need to come to work every day being able to show up as an American, a Hoosier, white, English speaking, a female, a single mother, an atheist, a world traveler, an Orange Theory addict, a Foo Fighters lover, a depression and anxiety sufferer, independent, strong-willed, and authentic. All of those pieces of me have to show up with me at work every day to be the most effective staff member that I can be. So once we figured out, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve, we knew how it felt because we already had it when we were a smaller organization. But then we were like, how do we create this culture? How do we continue that out and be really intentional with it? So once we identified, okay, we want everybody to show up every day, showing all of the pieces of them, we of course needed to go a step further about how do we actually do that. And this term that kept coming up in my research was psychological safety. And this was coined by Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School about 10 years ago. And she defined it as the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, right? So it's this idea that people feel like they can take risks, that they can be vulnerable, that when they fall in error, that their team is going to lift them up, and same that their team will celebrate their wins with them. This idea of psychological safety, that there's a deep-rooted trust and relationship building between everything. And, we're doing this for many reasons. I'm not going to go over all of these, but I did just want to point out there is a strong business case for creating this inclusive culture as well. You can see from these numbers, it hugely impacts your workforce, your retention levels, your engagement, all of it. It's nothing but a positive thing. So as we go into kind of some of the tactics that you might be able to use to create the psychological safety, I think it can really have a huge benefit on your organization. One other thing before we get into the actual tactics, I do want to dispel a myth about psychological safety, that it's not always happy. It's not always rainbows and unicorns and butterflies. There's been a lot of talk in the culture world about ping pong tables and arcade games and free lunches, and that's great. And there's a place for that. And I'm not trying to discredit that in any way, but that's also not what we're talking about here today. We're talking about something that's really challenging, that requires a lot of vulnerability, a lot of candor, that requires a lot of courage, quite candidly. So I want to make sure that we have our expectations set going into this. So as we did all this research trying to figure out what a culture of care really looked like and what it was, we came up with these 4 main tenets that we wanted to focus on at Luna. And those are building relationships, being intentional in designing our physical space and in how we use our time, facilitating whole person growth, and then also demonstrating vulnerability. So those are the 4 key factors that I keep in mind when I'm thinking about our culture of care and thinking about how we're tending for our diverse staff. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty about how we actually do that, some real tactics of how you might be able to take this back to your organization and things that have worked for us at Luna. The first one is super simple and it seems like not a big deal, but it really can have a huge impact on your staff. It's simply saying hello every day and using the person's first name and pronouncing their first name correctly. When we are in the office, it can be pretty easy to walk through the office and simply say hello to everyone. Obviously, in the last year in the pandemic, so many of us working remotely, we shifted that at Luna in that we utilize Microsoft Teams. And on our all staff thread, I send a message every morning at 8 a.m. kind of signaling that the workday is beginning and we're all online. And sometimes it generates more conversation and other times it doesn't. But I'll share an inspirational quote or a funny video or a link to an article about self-care, just trying to get the conversation going and to make people realize that even though we might have been separated physically, that we were in fact still online together in this virtual world. But as you shift back, as many of us now are shifting back into the office, taking that time to physically walk up and down the halls and say hi to people can be really important. And even if you don't have time to have a full conversation, that simple hello is really important. I also want to quickly address people's names, especially when you're talking about people from different cultures. Knowing how to pronounce someone's name can have such a huge significance in the way they are viewed and in the way they feel in your environment. So if you're unsure how to pronounce it, all you have to do is ask. It's really pretty simple to just say, can you please pronounce your name for me? I want to make sure I say it correctly. I think that can have a huge impact, especially when you're working with people from diverse cultures. And another thing that I think is a really great idea is to simply do a lunch and learn where you talk about the history of everybody's names and you can talk about the story. Maybe your name's a family name or a religious name, or maybe there's a funny story behind it. But just learning more about that history of why and how somebody was named can really help build relationships and create deeper connections. And it's such a simple thing that takes no preparation other than the intentional time of setting aside a little bit of time for a lunch and learn one day. We also have a big storytelling initiative at Luna. This is a really big part of who we are in a lot of different ways, but this is one of my favorites. This is a picture of Pepe at one of our staff meetings. We have a monthly staff meeting where our whole staff comes in and we reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes of that meeting to tell stories. So one of our staff members agrees to tell their Luna story and there are no rules around it. They're allowed to share whatever they want to share about themselves and their lives. And so sometimes people share their hobbies and interests and what brings them joy. And other times people share some pretty traumatic experiences about their journey to the US and what that might be like. We often have a lot of laughter. We often have some tears. It's a really emotional, moving, and one of my favorite parts of our organization because it really gives connection and discussion points for people to get to know one another better. And again, back to that intentionality piece, the fact that our organization reserves that 10 to 15 minutes every month to dedicate to this, I think sends us such a strong message to our staff that we care about you. We care about you so much more than simply the role that you're playing in our office. We care about you as a person. We care about your family. We care about your history and what brings you joy. We also like to share a lot of meals together. Breaking bread is one of the oldest traditions in the world. Piggybacking on the previous slide with our staff meeting, excuse me, in the beginning of our staff meeting, we cater in lunch. The organization brings in lunch for everybody. And we again spend about 10 or 15 minutes just sharing a meal together and catching up. Some of our staff is out actually interpreting in the community most days. And so we don't interact with them as often. And so just sharing that time to share a meal, to catch up, to say hello, again, is important. And again, the intentionality of dedicating time to that, I think, is what is so critical about that. The picture on the left, though, is from an onboarding lunch with new hires. One of the things in my role that I do is when we hire a new staff member at Luna, within their first 2 weeks in the office, I take them out to lunch with another team member from every other team in the organization. And so this is kind of does twofold. It provides people an opportunity to get to know one another better in a really comfortable, relaxed environment of just simply having lunch together. And then it also provides a touch point for that new hire in the other departments. So for example, if the new hire is part of the American Sign Language team, but they have a question in translation, they then have someone that they already have begun to develop a relationship with that they can go to and ask questions. And on the right is a mantra from an organization called the People's Supper. They have a really robust website of resources that is all based on developing connections and having courageous conversations. And I just really love the theme of kind of this mantra because it talks about the space not being perfect and that there will be flaws and there will be hiccups and there might be hard situations, but that we all are agreeing to come to it together with an open mind and an open heart to ask difficult questions. I would definitely encourage you to check out the People's Supper for lots of good resources if you are interested in doing more of this. We also like to celebrate a lot at Luna. This is again is one of our staff meetings and we are celebrating what we call Luniversaries. So they are the anniversaries of how long you've been with the organization. And you know, most of these things I'm sharing with you today are super cheap, inexpensive. They really take more time than anything. I mean, these are a bunch of helium balloons, right? So not hard at all, but it's colorful and bright and fun, and doing it in a public setting is really meaningful and really powerful to people. So every staff meeting that month, if you're celebrating your Luniversary that month, you get one balloon for each year you've been there. And then one of the other things that I love about it is love about this tradition is the balloons then stay around. So they kind of decorate the office for a couple of days and let people continue the celebration. And again, just a super fun way to publicly acknowledge people and the time they've given to the organization. And there's an actual symbol that represents it with the balloons. We also are really intentional at Luna about our walls and our spaces, our physical spaces. The picture on the right is our manifesto, and it's actually right outside the front door of our office. So immediately when you get off the elevator to enter Luna, it's right there. And I think it makes an incredibly strong statement about who we are as an organization, what we stand for, what we believe in. And then on the left is an example of some posters hanging in our office that not only does the message of no hate, just love send a message, but then it's also multilingual, obviously. So when we, you know, speaking to someone or having someone read something in their native language can be such a sign of inclusivity and welcoming and belonging. And it's as simple as utilizing that space. The walls are already there. So how can you utilize them to help further this idea of inclusion and equity? The other thing I love about it is not only does it send the message externally to visitors of your office about who you are as an organization and what you believe in as an organization, internally, it also really permeates the staff every day with these messages and what the organization stands for. So when you're sitting at your desk and you're looking at these multilingual posters and these messages of no hate, just love, how can you not be reconfirmed about who the organization is and that they want you there and they're excited that you're a part of everything they do? These are two of my very favorite parts of our office. And again, it's utilizing the physical walls and the physical space in our office. And it's about honoring and inspiring one another. Just beneath this picture that you can't see straight ahead with the gratitude and inspiration walls, there's a little tray that has headshots of every staff member in our office. And so on the gratitude wall, people are encouraged to take a headshot of someone they want to publicly thank, and they put it up on the gratitude wall and then write a little message about thank you for the hug, or it might be as big as thank you for the RFP help the other day. They run the whole gamut. Excuse me. They run the whole gamut of thank yous and what you might be thanking someone for. But again, doing it publicly, I think is really important. And it also adds some really great artwork around the office. The other thing that I think is so great about it is about once a month, we simply cut it off and pull it down and start over. So it's kind of this revolving artwork in our office that we can change, excuse me, change as needed. The right side is the inspiration wall, very much the same idea. People are encouraged to put up anything and everything that might inspire them. So that might be a quote they printed from the internet or a card. It might be a picture of, out your bedroom window in your homeland if you are an immigrant or refugee that came here that inspires you. And again, a way for people to share their cultures and share things about them that they appreciate and might miss. On the left, I know it's kind of hard to see, but this is our family wall. And it is a picture of every staff member and who or whatever they consider family. So it might be your spouse, your partner, siblings, parents, children, pets, friends. It could really be anything that you want it to be. And it's a way that we honor who you are and why you're coming to work every day. I feel very grateful that at Luna, many of us are driven by the mission of what we do. But at the end of the day, most of us are also working to provide for our family. That is really at the backbone of what we're doing. So providing the space to honor our family, I think is really important. And again, sends this message of if you are struggling with something going on in your family, if a child is sick or a parent needs help or something's going on, you don't have to hide that when you come to work at Luna. That can be part of who you are. That's part of who makes you you. And by signifying to our staff that we want to know your family and we want to know what's important to you and what brings you joy, I think sends a strong message. I'll tell one really quick story because I think it's so powerful. One of our staff members who's been with us for about 2 years, Leonella, is an asylee from Venezuela and had to leave Venezuela pretty quickly out of safety for safety reasons. And when she left, her family was still not in an incredibly safe, very safe environment. And they also did not have great cell service. And so within about the first month of her being at Luna, she was able to actually get her dad on the phone that had been difficult for them to do and look at him on the family wall in her family picture and kind of merge these two parts of her life together. And she was able to share with him about working at Luna and what she was doing, and also know that at least for that moment, her dad was safe and share that with him. And it just really reinforced for me the power of this family wall and how it can impact people. The other thing I want to add about the family wall is that I am incredibly intentional about making sure that before your first day as a new hire at Luna, your picture's on that wall. So your first day in the office, when you are coming in and you get a tour of the office, you're already up there. So there's no trial period. There's no waiting to see how things work out. It's simply once you're in, and we embrace you wholeheartedly from day one. And again, I just think this sends this really strong, sincere message of who we are and embracing and welcoming people from all walks of life and allowing people to show up as whoever they are. We also try really hard at Luna to share our cultures with one another. So we put on enrichment workshops that cover a whole mess of different things, but one of them obviously is related to culture. Excuse me. And you'll see the picture in the middle, that is Andrew and Hannah. And Andrew is a refugee from Burma. And when he first came to the US, his family opened a sushi restaurant. And so he is a master sushi chef and taught us how to roll sushi one day. And it was super fun and engaging and allowed Andrew to share more of his culture and more of his history with us about his journey here. And then, of course, gave us all lunch, and it was wonderful and delicious. We've done a couple things around food that are so fun because food is so binding and food is such a part of who we are. The one on the far right is from an animated short called Hair Love that we watched together as a group and then discussed together about the significance of hair, especially in the Black community, but also in lots of different cultures, and about how hair can be such a sticky point for lots of people in some ways, and also something that if we have questions and have conversations, it can really help us understand one another better and get to a different level of comfort in discussing those things. So again, I think that the intentionality of creating the space and the time for these types of events sends a really strong message and allows people to build these deeper relationships and this deeper level of trust that I think is hugely important and beneficial. We also are big believers at Luna of supporting organizations and community partners that represent and are important to our staff. So with the huge Burmese population in Indiana, we obviously service the Burmese population here and have quite a few Burmese members on staff. So Chin National Day, which is what this is a picture of, is a significant cause to us that we've been involved in for a couple of years. We also are very involved in several Latino organizations in town. Really any of them, but there's a way when you are able to support them financially and then also with your time and with your services, it demonstrates to your staff that you honor that part of their culture, that part of their history. And again, that they don't have to hide it, right? So it signals this inclusivity and this welcoming and this belonging that, we don't want you to come to work and feel like you need to hide this important part of who you are. We support these organizations. We support and embrace this culture that is part of you. Demonstrating vulnerability, I think, is huge and has become even bigger in the last year with the pandemic. This is a blog series that I created that actually grew out of us working virtually last year. We transitioned remotely within really a couple of days once the pandemic hit. And as we were missing and trying to navigate being remote and not having those day in, day out conversations, we were trying to figure out how to do that. So I began sending emails every Friday to our staff that contained both resources on COVID, how it was ever changing, and how you could take care of yourself and stay safe. I also shared resources about virtual events or virtual things happening to keep people engaged and finding, outlets of things to do. And then also started just sharing some of my own personal struggles or personal things I was seeing and also experiencing myself about the pandemic, and that it was isolating and that it was creating a lot of anxiety in lots of ways, and that it was a difficult, challenging time. So I started sharing some stories and ideas and thoughts and reflections that I was seeing in different ways to help in hopes of people not feeling isolated, in hopes of people feeling like there were other people having similar feelings that they were doing. Mental health has been a huge component of it this past year because I think it's been such a challenge for so many of us in the pandemic. As we've kind of shifted out of it, I am doing more pieces about all different parts of culture and the things that we do at Luna. But again, it's just a way for us to demonstrate some vulnerability, for us to start some courageous conversations, for us to actually talk about some things that sometimes are really challenging to do. And then lastly, I think it's really important just to remember to have fun. I think that this so often can be forgotten in the busyness of work and the busyness of our lives. This is a picture from our company party about a year and a half ago where we had a talent show. And people were able to get up and demonstrate parts of their culture, demonstrate parts of their history that were important to them. This is Hannah, Juella, and Leonella, and they did this beautiful dance that was gorgeous and amazing. We also had people get up there with their families and sing songs or do dances. We had a photo display. It was just a really fun way to share parts and pieces of us. And there were no rules. We had a third grader get up and tell some jokes. There were just no rules around it. It was just fun to get up there and share things about them and have families involved and be there for all of it. So I think it's really important to remember as well, just to have fun and find ways to spark joy with one another along the way as well. So in conclusion, we try at Luna to make a culture and an environment that is really focused on people feeling seen, heard, valued, and psychologically safe. And hopefully some of the things that I shared with you here today can be things that you can take back to your organizations and implement there to help create a similar environment for your organization, if that's what you hope to do. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stevie. So we are at about 10 to 1. So if anyone needs to hop off, totally get it. What I'd like to do is address just a few more questions, and then hopefully we can wrap up around 1 o'clock. So Stevie, for you, how do you address issues when something that inspires one person or is put on the inspiration wall, but that also may offend someone else? How do you address or manage that?
So I think it would really be just about having a conversation between those two people. So, and that's where I think this idea of psychological safety really comes in. So it would be encouraging and maybe facilitating having a conversation between the person who posted the image and then the person who might be offended by it, to try to bridge some of those boundaries and understand where what the true intention was behind the initial post and what was causing the offense, and try to create a bridge there between the two.
Thank you. The next question, what happens at Luna if someone doesn't want to share that much of their personal life at work?
They don't have to. So the stories are totally optional. There are plenty of people. I ask every month. I go because I also try to rotate it between gender and between different departments as well. Who's giving their story, and so I try to be intentional about who I'm asking. But there are plenty of people all the time who say I'm not interested, and I'm like, okay, that's totally your thing. So it's by no means a have to, a mandatory thing. It's just something that we like to encourage and do.
This question is a little bit in the similar vein, but a little bit different. Addressing discrimination in the workplace can be an uncomfortable topic. What does the company do when they experience pushback from other employees who feel these steps don't need to be taken?
I think again, to me, it all goes back to conversations. And I think that's where this idea of psychological safety is so important. So when these issues occur, having everybody sit in a room together and facilitate a conversation really can help bridge those two or whoever may be involved, the people together. So I think it's about building, I think a lot of the things that I shared are about building that foundational level of psychological safety. So there's a deep level of trust between people so that when issues do arise, you're able to have conversations about them.
And then specifically addressing the rise of reported Asian hate crimes. How do we address these topics at work when they come up?
I feel like a broken record. It's having conversations. So it's, I mean, it's really, I think exposure. I was just in a diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation the other day, and somebody was like, the exposure is the biggest part. And I do think that that is such a significant part of it. So it's creating the space and the time where people feel they are allowed to talk about it. Because a lot of times topics like that are things that people feel like they can't talk about at work. So it's allowing the space and the time where people can talk about it and have conversations in a respectful, kind way. You know, any of us are not going to stop the Asian hate that's happening, unfortunately, but being able to have conversations and having people feel supported in the things that they're sharing and at least maybe processing those feelings, I think can be really impactful.
And Stevie, I'm going to ask you one more question and then we'll switch back to some questions for Brian. With all the great inclusiveness described at Luna, what is your turnover rate or employee retention rate? So how does that correlate to the business case for putting the time and effort into essentially all the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I can't give you an actual number. And this has been one of the challenges is we've been trying to find a way to really quantify it because our growth has been so substantial that in most years, last year was obviously a little of an anomaly with the pandemic, but in most years we add 4 or 5 staff members and either we don't lose any or we might lose one because of they might be going back to school or different things. We do exit interviews, and most of what we have heard is that people are leaving for a higher experience, right? Not because of discontent or reasons that they're upset about. So unfortunately, I don't have a firm number for you, but it's something that we've been working on, and I wish I had more answers.
Thank you. Switching over to Brian. Sorry, I'm scrolling. We have a ton of questions over here, which is great. Brian, in an environment where 99% is one race and you are not, and the training is only given to the 99%, but not you, is this national origin discrimination?
I mean, it could be. I mean, so there's a lot when we talk about treatment, disparate in or I'm sorry, treatment cases. What you're going to be looking at is, you need to first identify what is the adverse action. In this case, maybe not given the training. And then you need to be able to identify, well, what was the basis? Why was this training not given to this individual? And if it is because of national origin, then that's a start. You'd still need to be able to show that there was, that's the reason for it. And sure, it may be much easier if we're talking about 99% and 1%, and you're the only person that wasn't given the training, and no one else is your same national origin. It could be, absolutely. But that's one of the things that you always want to look for when you're investigating a case is that we try to look at the whole picture as well. So, yep, absolutely, it could be if it's national origin and you were denied an employment opportunity or an adverse action was taken against you because of your national origin, then it may be um, national origin discrimination.
And this question actually comes from a local English as a learning language teacher. She says, if a teacher hears about an immigrant employee's problems at their workplace, in this case, she suggested experiencing harassment at their fast food restaurant, not getting promoted because of English proficiency at their warehouse job, etc. The question is, what should the teacher do? For the immigrant employee to take action, there are so many legal, linguistic, bureaucratic, and financial barriers.
Mhm.
They usually just remain quiet and report nothing.
Yeah, most, especially when you're talking about with harassment, most harassment isn't reported. 75% of harassment that occurs in the workplace is never reported. And so this is a big issue. And if you're seeing this, if you're seeing somebody being harassed and you're in a position where you could help, if you could provide resources, the EEOC's website can be translated into, you can click on a link and it'll translate into several different languages. If you wanted to schedule a time to contact an EEOC investigator, you can do that on the website as well. And an investigator will set up a time to talk to you. And we have various, not only do we have lots of bilingual investigators, but we have translators as well. So that should not be a problem to try to communicate with this individual to let them know what their rights are. Contacting the EOC is free. It's not something you have to pay for. Going through the investigation itself is nothing that you'd have to pay for. So that's a free process. It would just be contacting the EOC, getting the counseling, and then filing a charge. And that's all something that you can recommend to this individual.
Thank you. So we're right at 1 p.m. We have a ton more questions to get through, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to send out a follow-up email to everyone who registered for the event, and I will include both Brian as well as Stevie's contact information. That way, if you want to find more information about the work they do, more specifics about whether that's the cultural enrichment programs that Stevie spoke about, or different legal questions or processes for addressing discrimination or submitting complaints to the EEOC to Brian, I'll make sure that their information is included. With that, thank you all for giving so much great information. And thank you so much to all of the participants who submitted great questions and who joined us today for this now hour-long event. So with that, I will say thank you again and have a great day.